Good evening, ladies and gents. My name is Sebastian, and today we have officially reached the final between Magnus and Wesley. So, the first day of the Skilling Open, and I'm going to show the first game from the final here with Magnus with the white pieces. So, let's take a look. d4, knight of 6, c4, e6, knight of 3. Magnus has started to play knight of 3 quite a lot recently. Knight c3 is, of course, the main move, where the most common continuation is bishop b4, which is called the Nimzo-Indian defense. So knight of 3, the main move here is d5, knight c3, and there are a lot of moves. c6 is the Maran variation, or the semi-Slav. Bishop b4 is called a Rogozin line, a very interesting variation. D takes c4 is another interesting line, which usually goes like e3, b5, e5, knight d5, knight takes b5, and knight b6. Complicated stuff. e3 is also possible here with a more quiet approach with a6 or c5. Bishop b7 here is the old Nakamura variation, which I think is a lot more comfortable for white, and probably the reason why Nakamura stopped playing it. And last but not least is the move that Wesley plays, which is c5, and this is the Tarrasch defense. So, very interesting choice here. C takes d5, and here Wesley actually takes here. This is slightly strange, but it's very interesting. Magnus takes back with the queen. I always thought that queen a4 was not so dumb, but apparently it's not the best way to go nowadays after something like bishop d7, queen takes d4, e takes d5, and then simply knight c6 next. And this is not so clear. Well, white is probably slightly better, but I like Magnus's move here. Queen takes d4. It's slightly more principled. E takes d5, and here the main move is to strike in the center with e4. Very, very interesting move here, which might lead to an endgame, which is indeed what happens here. I can add that knight c6, bishop b5 doesn't change that much because black is more or less forced to take that endgame. After d takes e4, queen takes d8, king takes d8, and then knight g5, and things are fairly similar to the game here. So let's go back. D takes d4, queen takes d8, king takes d8, knight g5. Attacking both f7 and e4 here. Bishop e6 is the logical way to continue. Black needs to develop. If he does not develop, I am going to play bishop c4, and black is probably already completely lost, which is quite crazy. But he has to play bishop e6 in order to defend the pawn. So that is the logical way to continue here. Bishop e6, knight takes e6. F takes e6. White has successfully grabbed the bishop here, but it's not so easy to claim an advantage here. But of course, this is Magnus. Magnus, he is playing the white pieces. Known as the Komodo of chess. Well, that's what I like to call him. He spits out the venom, and the venom kills you eventually. It doesn't kill you immediately, it kills you eventually, and that's why these positions are very, very fitting for him. He's just squeezing. He's squeezing the blood out of the stone, if that makes any sense. Probably not. Alright, bishop c4, attacking on e6. So then king e7 is the way to defend the pawn. If not, you can obviously play something like knight c6, but I wouldn't recommend giving away this pawn here. Something like bishop takes e6, knight d4, and bishop e3. Would maybe be playable for black, but I'm not such a fan of this pawn. It can become very weak eventually, and I'm sure white is doing well here. So king e7 is a move I like, protecting the pawn. Simply castles. The plan is now bishop g5. Oops. Bishop g5 and rook e1, grabbing on e4. Knight bd7. And Magnus plays bishop e3 here, which is a little bit surprising, I must admit. To me, rook e1 was slightly more logical, to grab that as soon as you can, and then something like knight e5, bishop e3, or bishop f1, one of the two. And this is not so dangerous because I have rook e2. But okay, to be fair, black is probably not doing so badly here either. maybe white is just only slightly better. So bishop e3 can't be bad, but rook e1 was slightly more logical to me. Bishop g5 wouldn't have been that good though, because of king f7. And it's not so easy to win this pawn any longer. For example, rook e1 and then bishop b4. Black has a decent amount of activity. So bishop e3 is played. Rook c8 attacks the bishop. Bishop e3. And here is another move that I like. Knight c5. Getting more activity here. And after bishop takes c5, rook takes c5, we have an interesting endgame. Notice these bishops here. We have opposite colored bishops. And this is very drawish. They're infamous or for being rather drawish, so that is good for the defending side. However, having opposite colored bishops greatly favors the attacker. So it is slightly good for white that he has the initiative here in this position. He's simply going to play rook e1 and take on e4, and then he will at least have pressure. The question is if he will be able to break through, because again, we have opposite colored bishops, and if black gets to consolidate, the result is pretty much always a draw. So let's see what happened. Rook e1, g6, takes on e4, takes, e5. Already now it's looking more drawish than what it did. The line that was played was fairly forced. It's not so easy to get through and to open up the position, because with my bishop on g7, I defend the target on e5. My bishop might not be very good, it's very passive, at least compared to this bishop here. But it's still quite difficult to create something due to the lack of pieces on the board. Magnus, he tries f4, attacking on e5. Simply bishop g7, rook e1. And he wants to win a pawn. And indeed, it's not so simple for black to win that pawn back. But he comes up with something I thought was clever. To play rook f8. After f takes e5, simply rook f5. And now I'm more or less forced to play e6. At least if I want to win. I can of course play something like h3, but this is a completely dead drawn endgame here. So Magnus doesn't want to do that. He tries to push with e6. Bishop takes b2. Rook d1. I do believe there was a massive time trouble at some point in this game. I have to disclaim that I did not see the game live. That's my bad. I'll take that on my coat, as we say in Norwegian. But alright, let's see what happened here. Rook c7. g4 attacking the rook. The rook has to move. Rook f6 or rook f8. One of the two. Maybe even rook c5. But you do not want to leave the f file here, because if you do that, I can play something like rook f4 and now rook f7, and it's getting very dangerous. Black needs to be careful. So rook f8 is a good move, I think, to keep control here. And you can see that white has some pressure. He definitely has some pressure, but is it enough to win? We know we have the Komodo of chess here with white, but is it going to be enough? So king g2, b5, black wants some counterplay here, maybe a5, a4 eventually, and try to get rid of this bishop on b3. Rook e2, perhaps. It's not such a dumb try. Maybe try to double a little bit with rook d2. Is his plan, I think. And that's why Wesley played bishop c3, preventing rook d2. Magnus played rook e3, bishop b4. And the difference now is that black is controlling the e7 square with the bishop. This is quite important, because if I get a rook on, let's say, d7, Magnus played rook e d3. If I get a rook on d7, it's very good that the black bishop is controlling the e7 square. It's actually vital. It's the difference between a loss and a victory, or a loss and a draw, I mean, in many cases. And we see that in this game especially. Let's see what happened. So a5, more activity there. Rook d7, takes. King f6. And it's not so easy to win this game, of course. You need to find a way to push e7. So you need to get rid of this bishop somehow. And how do you do that? Not very easy. Magnus, he tries rook b7. Wesley plays a4. And here comes a great move from Magnus. He plays g5, and this is in fact the only way to make something happen. And this is now tactically, because we're attacking this bishop, and after king takes, rook takes b5, white is attacking the bishop on b4. So this is quite important. We have an important moment here. Magnus was hoping that he would have enough to win the game. And indeed, this is a critical position. What do you do now as black? Do you play king f6, or do you play the more forcing move rook f5? Let's calculate. Rook f5, rook takes b4, a takes b3, and the endgame we have looks very drawish, doesn't it? And this is indeed what Wesley thought. So we're gonna take a look at that shortly. Just gonna mention that king f6 would have been better, where this endgame here is very likely to end in a draw. For example, bishop b3 and then rook b8, rook a5, and then black needs to try to hold this. I don't think he's going to have any problems at all with that, but you never know. Magnus is the one with white. But when Magnus plays bishop e7, I can rook a7. I mean, Wesley can simply play bishop e7, so there are no issues, really. But Wesley, he played rook f5 instead. And I believe this was the case where both players were low on time. Magnus takes the bishop. That is the only way to try to win. And after a takes b3, the only move that wins, you can pause the video for a second if you want to try to find it. But the only move that wins is e7 here. And the point is that if I play rook e5, Magnus is rook b5, pinning the rook. So when I take the rook, I queen, and after b2, I can simply take the rook. So so this is completely winning. We probably get a situation like this, rook d5, but then I can take the pawn, and it's winning. So Wesley didn't do that. He took on a2. I'm sure he must have seen this. Queen, queen. But Magnus, he is ahead here. He is ahead, and he plays queen e7 check. And it's very deep, because now Wesley cannot play queen f6, because if he does that, I have queen e3. And after rook f4, king g3. And then I will win the rook, at least. There's probably something even better, but I think this is... everybody sees that this is winning, so it's the easiest way to show a win. And if Wesley moves his king, we have this checkmate here. Which I wonder what he missed. I really wonder what he missed here. But queen f6 wasn't possible, so he tried king h6. I'm sure he missed this continuation here. Rook h4, rook h5, queen f8. He cannot go to g5 because of queen f4 checkmate. So queen g7, queen f4, the only move is g5. And here queen d6, really important move. And the point is that after queen g6, queen f8, queen g7, rook takes h5 wins the queen, and Wesley so resigned. So that was one hell of a ride, that's for sure. A really great game, I must say. Very well played by both sides. I think Wesley played excellently, and he was unfortunate to blunder there, but that's what happens in time trouble. So well done by him. His only chance was to simply play king f6 in this position, where the game probably would have ended in a draw, but that's what happens when you play with short time control. It's a lot easier to blunder, and it's certainly not weird that he blundered this continuation right here, which is quite long. And yeah, I'm sure he must have overlooked that, and it's very easy. So a great start for Magnus. Will Wesley so come back from his loss? It remains to be seen. If he ends up losing the game, he will always get his second chance tomorrow, where everything will be decided. So stay tuned.